reasons to be anxious. So why does it matter if ColdFusion developers get anxious? Isn't that just natural? What's the problem with it?
It absolutely is, and I can speak from experience that I experienced something called analysis paralysis, which isn't just a tongue twister. It's when I have several ways to solve a problem. I will sometimes lock up and choose nothing. Like I've found before I got better at managing it, I could lose a half hour, an hour, just staring at my screen and kind of spinning, like the screensaver had turned on. Like it got to a point where it was pretty detrimental to productivity. But there are also
Welcome back to the show. Today we're going to be looking at GAD, General Anxiety Disorder, and I'm here with Jeffrey Kunkel, rhymes with uncle, and we're going to look at why this matters to all ColdFusion developers. You may be surprised by how many people this kind of thing affects. And we'll talk about anxiety, FOMO, imposter syndrome, analysis paralysis, being overwhelmed, OCD, perfectionism, and is anxiety all bad if you're a CF developer? And we'll also look at some solutions for dealing with this, particularly if you're going to conferences this year, because there's a lot of ColdFusion events happening, and that can bring out the worst in the anxiety. So welcome, Jeffrey.
Hello.
Hey, and if you don't know him, he's a ColdFusion developer. He's been one for quite a few years now, and he's just getting more active in the ColdFusion community. And this is the first time he's speaking publicly at a conference. So probably you're a little anxious about the whole talk thing that you're giving on anxiety. It's a bit of a self-referential loop there.
Living the experience I'm talking about, absolutely.
All right. And if you're anything like me, getting on a podcast is quite anxiety producing too. So so let's just come back to that question. Why does this matter to all ColdFusion developers?
It's, as I've been going to these ColdFusion conferences, there isn't anyone that I've spoken to that hasn't experienced at least some part of anxiety in their life. A lot of it is just FOMO, fear of missing out. You hear this brand new thing. My go-to example is I started as a graphic designer. So when I went to my first conference, I had no idea about version control at all. I wasn't taught it at college, and everyone spoke about Git and version control like it was everyone. Obviously, you know this already. And that definitely spiked some anxiety for me, but it also caused me to go look it up. Like, if it's something that everyone's speaking about as though, duh, you know it, it's probably worth a Google. But with talking to people, confiding in other friends I had made at the conferences, being like, hey, I actually don't know what this is. I've come to a point where, it's part of my everyday life now. Like, it probably should have been a few years ago.
That's a great point. I mean, because, if you're a developer, you're always learning new technologies, new methods. And often there are projects we work on where we're under a lot of time pressure to get stuff delivered. Or you've got a bug that's like stopping the whole application running and you've got to fix it. So a lot of reasons to be anxious. So why does it matter if ColdFusion developers get anxious? Isn't that just natural? What's the problem with it?
It absolutely is, and I can speak from experience that I experienced something called analysis paralysis, which isn't just a tongue twister. It's when I have several ways to solve a problem. I will sometimes lock up and choose nothing. Like I've found before I got better at managing it, I could lose a half hour, an hour, just staring at my screen and kind of spinning, like the screensaver had turned on. Like it got to a point where it was pretty detrimental to productivity. But there are also less dire circumstances too. Just with your anxiety level up, your stress level tends to go up, and that just in general, stress is no fun. It can go home with you. Like having a stressful day will affect your whole life, whether or not it's work or home. It's kind of get into a feedback loop. You get stressed at work because of anxiety. You go home, you're grumpy. You add more stress to your life because maybe your grumpiness isn't received well at home. Then you come into work more stressed out. It's something that anyone can benefit from learning to identify and kind of step back from.
Yeah, and I guess, if you get that feedback loop really going bad, and it can lead to depression,
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Just not feeling good and not wanting to take care of your health, not getting on well with your family. Yep. And, ultimately, if it gets too bad, it can lead to suicidal thoughts or actual, suicide. So,
yes,
I did an episode with Jorge recently on CF suicide, and I'll link to that in the show notes. But this is a serious thing. It's just anxiety is the first step on a slippery slope that ends pretty nasty.
Exactly. I have one of my first slides in the presentation is I'm not a doctor. If you're experiencing some of the more extreme parts of this, I recommend talk to not only your friends and family, but there's phone numbers you can call, and it's very serious.
Yeah, so it can get in the way of productivity and health. You mentioned FOMO. Is that really common among developers, do you think? Or
it might not. FOMO is kind of the buzzwordy term for it. I think it's more just worrying that you're going to miss something, which and not like, because it's not just, oh, I didn't get invited to Susan's kegger. It's just the containers. What on earth are containers? Everyone else knows about it, and I don't. I have fallen behind, and one thing that really helps me with that is to take a deep breath, maybe 5 minutes of mindfulness. That is one of learning to step back and breathe is one of the biggest helpers I've had in this whole process. But reach out to your contacts, your coworkers. Like, do you know what Docker is? Do you know why you would use it? And I found that all of my advice is good, but there isn't quite anything quite as good as a community. Like just having people to reach out to and just be like, have you experienced this? That has been one of the biggest helps, and why I will never stop going to these conferences. Like it opened a whole world of just like minds to me. It's been a giant help.
Yeah, just knowing you're not alone in feeling anxious at work,
I
think is a good start. And we'll talk more about what you do for stress management to reduce your anxiety and the mindsets later. You mentioned that when you went to a conference, you felt a bit of an imposter because everyone else seemed to know what Git was, and you're like, I don't know I don't use that yet.
Yeah.
So tell us a bit about that imposter syndrome, because I think quite a few people have that.
Yeah. It, of course, as part of what imposter syndrome is, I felt like it seems silly even looking back on it right away, but I felt like I was the only one who had it. And it's just, again, part of the anxiety. But almost everyone I've talked to has experienced it in some way, and it's not even in just our industry. I've talked to we have customer service representatives here because we're e-commerce, and they will experience it also. Like it just the feeling that you're going to get caught, like someday someone's going to like slam their hand down on your desk and be like, I know that you don't know what you're supposed to. It took probably 2 to 3 years to realize that it was not just in my head, but it was something that I was kind of perpetuating. But one thing I've kind of used as a mantra since then is fake it till you make it, which is not, that one's not mine. That one has kind of existed out there for a while. But particularly with the Git, it was, well, I'm going to try, just start. That is something that is so important in the fear of missing out and imposter syndrome, is to like, well, I've decided that this is something I should know, just start doing it. And you'll be amazed at how fast things will fall in. Like just get installed on my machine and just running commands. Really, you won't be an imposter anymore because you're doing it. Like I like to remind myself that like my key skills as a developer are problem solving and Google. Like it's just the ability to realize you don't know something and it's okay to look it up. Like, and then, retaining it at a certain point. But if there were honestly, we should probably start cutting checks to Stack Overflow where I work. Like it's always open. Like you never know, because we're a relatively small team and we don't have, I believe our oldest developer is at about 10 years development. So we don't know everything, and just being okay with not knowing everything is really, it helps fight the imposter syndrome when you know that nobody knows everything. You just have to be okay. You need to let yourself not know things.
Yeah, and I think given the state of modern web development, it's pretty much impossible to know everything about everything. How could you know everything about ColdFusion and the database and the front end and deployment strategies and testing and everything else? It's just impossible to know. Maybe 20 years ago you could know everything about web development, but that's no longer the case.
Yeah, especially with the full stack developer trend, where you are you're expected to know a lot more than you were. But it's better to be capable of finding out rather than just to have it in your head. Just be capable of learning and know where to look.
Or know where to look, like you're saying, Stack Overflow, using Google, maybe the CF Slack channel,
Yes,
that's another
absolutely.
way people solve problems.
Yeah, coworkers and people you've met through conferences and what have you.
Blogs, maybe even a podcast. So, and I think, being okay to admit you don't know something is a key part of that, because I know I used to struggle with that. So now I'm totally okay admitting I don't know stuff.
There's a big fear of, if you say you don't know, you'll get in trouble, or they'll find you out that you don't know. But you have to realize that, while some people, like people who have been in the field longer, will have more things just at the ready. Everyone doesn't know things from time to time, and it's fine to ask. Or even just if you're finding you have this a lot, just asking how they will find out. Like I know, like Stack Overflow or Google, like just where do you go to when you have an issue? Like just that communication chain is so important.
Yeah, and I think there are ways of asking. It's possible to ask in one of these, the Slack channel or Stack Overflow, and ask in a way that's helpful. So you give all the information so people know what you've tried and why it's not working. And you help other people who are, who are new compared to you. So you're not always just taking and taking, you're giving back. And at the very least, what you can do is if you've asked a question and a lot of people have given stuff, you can report back and say, okay, this is what worked, or this is a summary of the whole discussion. There's ways to provide value even if you're new at the thing.
The dialogue is very important.
Now, if people get rid of their imposter syndrome, isn't there a danger that their ego is going to mushroom?
There is it's a little bit is healthy. I think just maintaining that humility in remembering when you didn't know the thing, as you get further on, and as more of it just comes to the top of your memory, to remember where you came from. I've been very fortunate, and I have not experienced a lot of ego in the one-on-one interactions I've had, but it is definitely it's a danger if you let it get out of control. But to remember the people that helped you when you were going through it.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think it's harder to control the ego online than it is in person. That's why you see these flame wars happen, or people,
absolutely.
So it's much easier not to do that when you're in front of someone.
Yeah.
So what about overwhelm with just too many things to do and multitasking and just feeling you're always behind? Is that part of this? Or
that is absolutely part of it, and one of the things that would cause me to kind of lock up and lose time. And I personally found that taking a longer amount of time to prep for a project would make it overall go faster. And this is something that's personally worked for me. I know there's Todoist is what I currently use, but there's tons of list apps and web browser apps and whatnot, or just, a good old fashioned notebook where you can write down your steps. And I find the more I do it, the better I am at doing it, at sitting down and knowing what I need to do, what I need to bullet out. Because when I first started doing it, it'd be like a whole project would be like 3 bullet points, and it wasn't super helpful. But now I think my most recent project it's maybe a week-long project, and it had like 50 bullet points in it. It's very even the smallest steps, because it also kind of plays into the dopamine, hitting that little check mark. It's I finished something. It can help you doing 50 tiny things feels great, as opposed to you get doing 3 big things. It's the same amount of work in the long run, but to just during one you get, and it's an hour before you're clocking out and you're hungry and you're just getting 2-3 more things done rather than just putting a pin in something you're going to finish in 2 days. It really helped me.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because then at the end of the day, instead of feeling like you just have this whirlwind of activity, you can say, oh, well, I actually got 3 things done that were important on this project, or whatever the thing is. Oh, I think that does feed into it. Do you use the getting things done method? Is that part of you said you use Todoist, which is kind of related to that book, Getting Things Done by Dave Allen?
I actually will have to add that to my reading list. I have not. That's
Well, he basically, I mean, it's basically a book about how to get things done more efficiently and not get
right.
anxious about it. And the key is what you said earlier. You write down what you're going to do. So partly so
Yeah.
you can plan it out, but partly so you can get it out of your mind, because the human brain can only hold so many things. I think it's like 7 items we can hold in our brain, in the conscious part of it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And yeah, I mean, it's sort of like a computer. It's only got so many bits of memory in the CPU. I forget what
Right.
registers, that's what they call them. And then it has to offload it off into RAM or off to the hard drive or whatever,
Right.
so it doesn't get nutted out. And the same with humans. So definitely good. Now, how does perfectionism tie into this? Is that part of what makes developers anxious, or?
It can be, and I know it was something that I have struggled with, and particularly some people I've known have struggled with, in that you want it to be perfect, and you need to make sure, like, something that will lose you a ton of time is you open up a legacy document and it's not tabbed the way that you tab it. So you're gonna need to make sure it's all correct in like the 5,000 lines on that document. And it's sometimes, especially in crunch time, it's okay just to do the task you need to do and like bookmark it for, hey, we've got a slow week. I remember that one. I'll come back to that. Like, it's okay to come back later. It doesn't have to all be, you don't have to address issues that are issues for just you or just stylistic issues. Granted, like, they're important. Like, I'm not trying to say, it's fine, don't comment, don't, tab or anything, but I know we work at a small team with e-commerce, and when the logistic department needs something for FedEx shipping, it needs to be done yesterday, like every time. So sometimes you need to allow yourself to put out something that is perfect as far as the one thing that your client, in my case, the department needs, but maybe not perfect in the web standards for 2018. Like,
That makes sense. So kind of prioritizing things and not having to make everything perfect. Now, how does that tie into OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder?
I have found that obsessive compulsive disorder is a relatively recent diagnosis for me. So I'm still finding how it's applying to my day-to-day work life, but I know the check marks, the to-doist, that is a possibly benefit from my obsessive compulsive disorder, that I will drill everything down and get all my ducks in a row before I do something. That is something that helps me. But one thing that is very much a detriment is my anxiety will spike if I get interrupted. And with a 3-person team, you get interrupted like all the time. It happens, things break. And that's something I've been very recently, learning to, if you need to take, again, 5 minutes to go breathe, go stand out in the cool air and just be like, okay, I'm going to need to postpone what I was doing. This thing is, figuratively on fire. We need to put it out. We need to get it fixed so that we can keep taking sales. We can keep getting lighting fixtures out to the world. It's definitely like pros and cons to everything, but I'm finding that obsessing over your process can be great, but if you do it just a little too much, you can really stress yourself out.
Yeah, and I think where it goes from being useful, where you're like double checking stuff or avoiding bugs, it's where you keep coming back to the same thing that you
Yes.
already checked before,
Yeah.
and you can't leave it alone. So
Yes,
that would
absolutely.
be, that's where it gets, I think, to be a practical problem. And then obviously if it's causing you anxiety and stress, then it's an issue anyway. When you get interrupted, do you kind of save away the current state? You kind of maybe write down where you were, or even make a to-do item for where you were, or something.
Yes, it's been very with the advent of starting to use Git, using something like Stash, where you can make a little note of exactly what you're doing when you stash the files or the changes. Or Todoist is a very good place. You can just, because they have the tiered list, you can just drop a little check mark and be like, this is what I was doing, this is what I need to start up again with. Just it's it can almost be anxiety inducing to think about, like, I have to take notes on this and this and this and this, but when you think of it as it's just like a structure to I'm personally very, very scatterbrained. If it isn't written down or make a note of on an app or something, it is gone. So it's something that I've learned to rely on. Pretty much, it isn't an inconvenience to break everything down, to make note of where I was, because I've learned that I will lose significantly more time than it takes me to write it down if I don't.
Yeah, it's just going to cause anxiety and time wasted when you come back to it, or create bugs. If I get interrupted in the middle of a complicated piece of code, it's easy to forget to do something.
Yep.
Now, here's something I've seen with a lot of developers. We have a lot of screens, perhaps. We have a lot of browser tabs going. Does that relate in some way to the anxiety, or for you? Or?
I tend to I'll have the tabs open and whatnot, but I will have like what I'm currently working on alone. It tends to, right now, it's email, Sublime, and then whatever page I'm working on. And I do not keep my speakers on my computer, because like chat notifications, things like that will just throw me off. Like if I see the little blinking icon, that's enough for me. Like I might not answer in the first 5 minutes, but I'll get to it. And just realizing, communication is important, things like that. But the ever blinking and beeping and the sirens going off of just our connected world can really, really slow things down. So if I were to have everything up and instantly accessible that I have running at any given point, I would get overwhelmed. So I tend to, like, it's there, it's minimized. Like I don't need, so I can have access to it pretty quickly, but it needs to be hidden basically when I'm in the zone, when I'm working.
Do you use music to help you focus better and reduce your anxiety, or?
That is, we are currently in an open air office setup. So headphones are like tool number one for me right now, because just keeping, again, other people beeping and whatnot. And sometimes people have to tap me on the shoulder before I realize they're there, but that's something that I'm fine with. And they realize I'm not being rude. It helps me zone in. I will often listen to music or sometimes podcasts. I know some people have expressed having trouble listening to a podcast and coding at the same time. That sometimes I need to hit that back 15 button a handful of times because I missed something, but it hasn't slowed me down too much in my personal experience.
And I think it depends on how intense the coding is. You know, if it's just cleaning up the formatting of the code, that's one thing. If you're trying to solve some difficult problem, it's
there are definitely moments in the day where the headphones get set down and it's time to like furrow your brow and really look at this. Like it's.
I mean, I found I use Brain FM, which is a website that puts out music of different kinds and doesn't have any words, and they have a focus music that I think they call this binaural beats, where it has a slightly different sound in each ear and it does something to your brain. I couldn't quite explain scientifically what it does, but I will tell you it helps me focus.
Yeah,
so,
and there was a point in time where I was really into just rain noise, just throw on the sound of a thunderstorm, and they're definitely like different, and whatever works for you the best. If if a podcast works best, if heavy lyric music works best, but I find that definitely for focus, for like it is time to really solve something without lyrics or just like a white noise help me the most.
And it kind of puts you in that zone, and you almost don't hear the music. You're just like really focused on the code. So that's cool.
I am a culprit of getting very jumpy at that point, though. If someone will tap me on the shoulder, that I will definitely and the people have learned that I'm not mad. It's fine. I was kind of in it.
Maybe you almost need a sign up, on your desk saying, intense debugging occurring. Come back in 30 minutes or something.
There is a I'm sorry for what I said while debugging mug that lives in the web department.
Now, you mentioned some ways that you deal with anxiety and stress, taking a break. Do you find, I find that works for me. I find if I try and do stuff for more than I can easily do half an hour of focused work. Mm-hmm. I can stretch it to an hour, but once it gets beyond that, my kind of productivity, I actually introduce more bugs than if I took a break for,
Yeah, there's as kind of a unrelated yet absolutely related thing. Due to stress eating, I ended up with type 2 diabetes about a year back, and I got one of those trackers for my wrist, and it like taps me every hour. It's like, stand up, make sure your blood's flowing. And it's been wonderful. Like it wasn't something I was focusing on in my kind of like getting through anxiety, was the amount of time between breaks. But now that through the fitness part of my life that I'm trying to improve has absolutely improved my anxiety also. It's just stand up, make sure that you prevent a blood clot, and just let your brain rest also. I'm not hearing you, unfortunately.
Oh, sorry.
It's all right.
There's using food for self-medicating, and like the midnight Twinkie or pizza in order to get the coding done. Really solve the issue of the anxiety in development, or
it would make the anxiety go away. It would light your brain up with the Christmas lights of dopamine, but it led to unhealthy parts of the rest of my life. I know I went from from my first sit down desk job, I probably put on 30 pounds in a year. It was something I've struggled with ever since, just not being up and around moving. Like when you worked when you worked retail, you were walking around talking to customers, things like that. And it's incredible how much being active and what you eat affects your anxiety levels and things like that. We're talking, it's all feedback loops. It's all, you get stressed, you eat an entire pizza, that makes you not feel so good. Then you get a little more stressed because you're not feeling great. And it's really, I've had to kind of curb most of my bad habits all at once. And I let it get to a point where it was a bit dire, but it's something that if you can get out ahead of that and because bad food, junk food is great. It's amazing. A little bit here and there, moderation, it's the best. But don't let it get to a point where you're not allowed to eat it anymore. Take it word from me.
Yeah, you don't want to be. You don't want to be at the corner with the pizza pusher, giving you illicit pizzas. Now, we mentioned food there, but people use a lot of other things to self-medicate. Probably the primary one is alcohol, but other drugs, even using TV or pornography or all kinds of shopping. All kinds of things. So what's the problem with using alcohol to just take the edge off your anxiety?
It's, again, I personally find that I'm not as sharp. And I've known people that'll swear up and down on their favorite dog's grave that they work better with one beer in them. But that hasn't been my experience. I tend to, again, you end up with more bugs later. And
it's. I think it's hard to stop at the one beer. Maybe one beer. Perhaps you do code a little bit better. Perhaps, though. I'd agree with you. It probably does make it harder to solve difficult problems. But then once you've had one beer, it can be hard to not have a second beer and then a third.
It's compounding. It's easier to justify the next the more you've had. Absolutely. And
I've seen this an issue at ColdFusion conferences. That people get anxious just being around a whole bunch of people, or they're afraid they're not as good as the other people, and then, or they just don't, they feel anxious talking to strangers, and so the answer is more alcohol.
It is. It's like I recognize alcohol. Like I have alcoholism in my family. I'm very careful with my intake. I do drink socially now and again, but I try very, very hard not to use it to solve anything. It is an additive at best in my experience. It shouldn't be your solution to something, and I know it's easy. It is. It can be easier to talk to people when you've had a few in you, but also what you're talking about can be rough sometimes, depending on how many you get in you. That is definitely something I have been a culprit of in my life.
Me too. I gave it up about 9 years ago. So
awesome.
I just it was just getting in my way. So and I find I can go to a party now and I'm fine on the anxiety. And if I get anxious, I'll just pop out for 5 or 10 minutes, or, I don't have to stay there if it's not doing it for me.
Yeah.
Two other things that I've seen people use to help is exercise and sleep. I don't know if those are things you do to help.
Yes. Sleep is still the one it's kind of the thing that the thing I get the least of that I really ought to. I'm averaging around 6 hours right now. I really ought to find those extra 2. But it's one of those, I get up 2 hours early to exercise. So it's like, do I lose the exercise or the extra hours of sleep? And there are obviously things that I could give in, but right now I've kind of budgeted myself tight with, I also am, and this is a big de-stressor for me, is like, I like to get like 3-4 solid hours of family time. I have an 8-year-old daughter and a partner who I love very much. And I like to make sure we have family time every day. And it's kind of one of those, I know I need to sleep more, but it's like, do you give up the exercise or the family time or the work time? There's got to be give and take with everything. But since I've started exercising, and I did used to sleep like 3 to 4 hours a night before I was really managing things better. And those extra, like going from 3 hours to 6 hours is night and day. But sleep and exercise have really helped. And one thing I found as I would exercise more, I seemed to get more out of my sleep. Like as my body was in better shape, I was feeling more rested with the slightly less amount of sleep. But the no exercise and no sleep was a very bad combo.
And all the junk food.
Yep. Yeah.
And the alcohol.
There was a bit of a spiral that you can get caught in pretty easily because they all feed into each other.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I find more sleep does help me solve problems faster. I actually am more efficient at work. I'm better with my friends and family.
Yeah.
And that's something, it's up, we all have to make our own trade-offs and decisions, but it's possible that your daughter might actually have a better experience with you if you had a little bit more sleep. Just a thought.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or maybe half an hour less exercise. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's something that you, with the obsessive compulsive disorder diagnosis, I found that I need to look into my habits, because I will get into something. It's like, I spent this many hours doing this. I spent this many hours doing this. And that's something that I'm learning to break out of. Like, I was like, it's okay to sleep a little more today, or like, see if you get by on a half hour of exercise instead of a full hour. And that's my personal area of growth right now, is breaking out of my habits that I tend to form.
Yeah, I mean, I must say, for me, I find it easier to add sleep on the front end than the back end. In other words, it's easier for me to make sure I go to bed earlier than trying to deal with it when I'm waking up.
Yeah, that is where I ended up finding my hours of sleep. It's getting to bed at 9:30, 10 o'clock as opposed to midnight to 1 was a big change for me. And I know when I feel rested, I've had solutions to a problem pop into my head in the shower, but it's never when you're like 2 hours of sleep, barely coherent, that like the solution to something pops into your head. It's always after like a good night's sleep that I've personally found that happens to me.
Now, we haven't mentioned the C word here, caffeine, because that often relates to anxiety, and it relates to lack of sleep, or it did for me. Because I would not get enough sleep, and then I'd be drinking 2-3 cups of coffee just to even be awake.
Yeah. Absolutely. My first job was at a Dunkin' Donuts. I spent 7 years there. Caffeine has been a part of my life for the better half of it at this point. In recent years, I've cut down to like perhaps an energy drink and 2 cups of black coffee. Like I was at a point of 10 cups of coffee in a morning. It was it got medically concerning at one point. I had medical ramifications from that, but that was something that when you're 25 and you're having your prostate looked at, it's at a point where you're like, okay, maybe it's all right to drink less coffee.
Yeah, I mean, I gave up coffee in 2001 and tea as well. So I gave up
more power to
caffeine.
you. That's amazing.
Yeah. And I'll get tired. I used to use caffeine in the afternoon when I was tired. Now I'll just take a nap or go for a walk or drink more water. Or, being tired is a signal from my body that I need to do something different.
Right.
For me, caffeine was just covering that up, so I wasn't hearing the signals.
Yeah, it is. It's again, yeah. It doesn't so much fix the issue. It just it prolongs it.
Yeah. The other thing I found in recent years that's helped me is melatonin, which is like a natural drug you can get at the supermarket that it aids in sleep. And supposedly the older you get, the less of this stuff you naturally produce in your brain. And it helps me go to sleep. It also helps me stay asleep instead of waking up in the middle of the night. So might be worth checking out for people listening.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What about women and developers and anxiety? Because I think there's some statistics that say women tend to get anxious more than men. And so all the things we talked about, the imposter syndrome, the anxiety, the OCD, does that affect female CFers more than male? Or
I would have to say yes. And a fact that I know far less female CFers is speaks to this. It's tough to be the minority in a pretty established group. I know I've been in ColdFusion for about 5 years at this point, and I keep up with the CF State of the Union tweets he put out, and it's even being in 5 years, like the vast majority of people that you'll be speaking to at some of these conferences have been doing it twice the amount of time, quadruple sometimes. It's amazing. And I know I can take my personal experience and kind of extrapolate that onto, because I am fortunate in the fact that I see a lot of similar faces when I head out into any tech conference. So I try to personally reach out and have conversations with women at these conferences, just because having contacts to talk to is what helps me. And I know I can't know from personal experience, but I know from just kind of a sense, trying to use some empathy and sympathy, that it's tough out there, and just trying to be a resource in any way is kind of how I've been attempting to add to the community in that way.
That's great. I mean, I did some interviews the end of last year with some women developers, and there's definitely, the things we talked about here are an issue there. So I'll link it. I did an episode with April Graves, who
awesome.
I'll link that into the show notes along with the suicide episode that I did with Jorge. So anything else on general anxiety disorder you want to share with the audience before we flip to some other questions?
It's okay to feel anxious. All of it really boils down to that. You're not weird. Some people it affects more than others, but odds are, if you reach out to someone in the field with concerns like this, they're going to understand. And that's if I can get people to do one thing, it's talk. It's just, if it sits in your head, it can feel a lot worse than it is. It's talk to people, if it's your direct coworkers, or if it's someone you've met at a conference, or just the CF Slack, just someone that people know what you're going through. That's kind of the big, what I'd like to get through to people.
That is a great suggestion. So instead of hiding away from other people or self-medicating, talk about what's going on, and maybe you might be able to figure out how to reduce the anxiety.
See what's worked for other people.
Yeah. So let's switch gears a little here. Why are you proud to use ColdFusion, Jeffrey?
It's something that coming from a graphic design background, I knew almost no. I had a little bit of PHP when I was hired, and I was the company that hired me was. I'm incredibly gracious to the fact that they trained me in the entirety of my ColdFusion knowledge, and we used the tag based syntax, and coming off of basically knowing just HTML and CSS, it was easier for me to learn as someone who's worked mostly in the visual medium before then. And it was they sat me down with the CF10 book and had me work through the exercises, and it all kind of flowed through or flowed well. And it's something that I've definitely I still was actually finishing up my degree when I was hired. I was doing it over the internet, and for some of my final projects, I would get, I believe it was Rilo at the time. It was just before Lucy, when I was just like, I'm going to spin one of these up for my final project, because rather than reteach myself PHP, I prefer it. It's just something it was comfortable to learn, and remains very. Yeah. It's like a warm blanket now. Like it's very, and like I've definitely started to get at stick a foot out of the blanket and like learn things about Node and whatnot. But ColdFusion plays well with a lot of that, and I've at no point been like, well, maybe I should jump ship. Like, it is just everything I've learned has just made me feel more comfortable with it, and more affirmed in the decision to really dive in head first. It was immersion therapy as far as ColdFusion was concerned for me.
That is great. So, sometimes in the past, people have said ColdFusion is dying, and my belief is that it's alive, and it's capable to be used as a very modern language, which is one of the reasons I started the CF Alive podcast.
Right.
But I want to ask you, what would it take to make ColdFusion more alive this year?
Ooh, I think well, it's kind of something that an observation I had made when I first started. My very first tech conference was a JS Conf, and then I went to my second was Dev Objective, previously CF Objective, then CF Objective again. And I noticed there was a difference in, there was a lot more soft talks at the JS conference. And that's it's one of the reasons I submitted this talk. Was I want it to feel I felt very welcomed as a young developer in ColdFusion, but I think just to have to kind of not so much copy other languages, but just to be open, and like there are things that people worry about as far as starting a new language, and it's I want everyone to be able to experience what I have. I have yet to meet a sour egg or a rotten egg out of the bunch. Like, I know statistically there's got to be somebody out there that I won't get along with, but it's been really incredible. and I'd like to just kind of have a talk that would attract someone who has been in it for a year or hasn't done ColdFusion at all, and because those were some of the talks that attracted me. Was the, like, obviously you need the hard talks where you're learning, you're taking something, you're taking some good notes for the guy who paid for your ticket to get there, but just some of the more open discussion, community driven things really were what helped bring me in as a young developer, and I would love to be part of more of those things to help bring people in.
That is great. So you're going to be speaking at Into the Box in Houston, Texas in April. What are you looking forward to at this year's Into the Box?
Honestly, one of my biggest things is seeing the people I've met before. Like I've made some good friends at Ortus Solutions and Mira, and it's just not only am I going to go learn, I'm going to go see friends, which is incredible. Also, I've never been to Houston, so I'm excited for that.
All right. Well, great city. Lots of things to see and do there. I hope you drive a car because you're going to need one to get around, unless you just take the Uber from the airport to the conference hotel and stay there, which is an option.
Right.
So, and it's, I went last year. Into the Box was amazing conference, lots of great technical stuff, very interesting people, and lots of good networking and opportunities just to be with a few folks over lunch or that kind of thing. So cool. So if people want to find you online, what are the best ways to find you?
Honestly, right now I'm most active on Twitter. This is the giving talks is brand new to me, and it's probably going to, fake it till you make it. I'm probably going to have more places to point you in the near future. Just as people are looking to talk to me, I'm going to need more places for them to find me. But as of right now, it's Twitter's probably the best place to get a hold of me.
And your handle is what?
It is my handle from high school, it was my AOL Instant Messenger handle from high school, but it is Nerdtastic 91686.
All right.
Yeah, I'll send that to you for the show notes. It's probably easier. But
yeah, we'll put that in the show notes together with all the things you mentioned and the other episodes we mentioned that are related to this. So, well, great. Well, thanks so much for being on the show, Jeffrey.
Thank you for having me.